Well, we've been going on a journey with the great wines of Rioja, starting off with Rosé, then going into a Blanco, a Crianza. We're tasting Reservas right now. We've gone from our friends at La Rioja Alta. Now we're going to be introducing you to Lopez de Heredia. And we have a special guest joining us. Mr. Martin Reyes is a master of wine. He's located in Northern California, and he's a noted educator and partner in the importation of these wines with WineWise. And Mr. Reyes, it's great to have you on our Zoom.
Mr. Ian Blackburn, it's great to have you here to be with you. Right back at you, man. I love it.
I've long had an admiration for Lopez de Heredia wines, and I'm sorry, Martin, I got to start again.
Sure.
Because I had the Zoom up instead of being able to introduce you without it.
Of course, man. No worries. You told me that's why we're recording and doing the editing, so I'm cool.
Here we go, Hannah. Take two.
All right, Hannah. Let's rock and roll.
All right, we were on this journey through Rioja. We've started off with a beautiful Rosado, then we moved into a Blanco, and we've then hit Crianza and Reserva. Now we're going to a second Reserva with a very different story. And we've got a great storyteller who's joining us today. We're going to be visiting Lopez de Heredia. This is a storied estate, and we need someone great to talk about Lopez de Heredia, and we couldn't ask for a better guest to have Master of Wine Martin Reyes join us from Northern California. He is a partner in the importation of this wine. And Martin, we are so excited to be able to spend some time talking about Lopez de Heredia, the 2011, which is the current vintage for this reserve.
There it is.
Boom.
Yep. 2011, Coravend, ready to go.
All right. And Martin, how long have you been a master of wine now?
It's been 5. Gosh, can't believe it's been 5 years. 2018.
Spectacular.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of you. I got to study with you for a couple of years and watch you shine. Exciting to see what you're doing.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here, and in particular, as you mentioned, yes, I'm a partner at WineWise, based here in California, and we're based in Northern California, and we are the exclusive importer of Lopez de Heredia in California. And it's to say that out loud, because I obviously, as you know, I joined recently, is sort of takes my breath away, because Lopez de Heredia is one of the most legendary producers in Spain, and it's often considered one of Rioja's crown jewels. I think it's going to celebrate 150 years this on the 27th, 2027. So they started in 1877, and I think that not only a lot of people would agree with me, not only is Lopez de Heredia epitomized this timeless artisanal winemaking, but the winery and the vineyard, the historic Condonia vineyard, they have remained in the same family, in the same family hands since the beginning. It's an almost magical rarity for in the region to have essentially a single site, single owned, single winery being in the same family hands all this time. And what adds to that magic is that Lopez de Heredia has also resisted the tractor pull, the tractor beam pull of corporatization, technological upgrades, and generations of marketing trends, of winemaking trends, and essentially have remained unchanged since their foundation, 1877. And they're known to produce jaw-droppingly delicious and preternaturally aged with the Riojas.
What I love about it too is that they seem to look for ways to continue to turn back the hands of time and to lean into that historical sense. And you'll see what I mean in the next couple of slides. But also in this picture here, an absolutely beautiful roadside approach to this winery, which I've been able to visit. And they put this iconic modern architectural piece done by a very famous designer whom I'm not, who I don't know the name of, but in the architectural world, quite a famed architect. And it's just another feather in their cap that has, and you mentioned this estate being, such a special Rioja producer. I would dare to say if you made a list of the 100 world brands that have the most impact in their category, this is in that list, maybe even towards the top. This is a really special producer.
Yeah, and Zaha Hadid is the Iraqi architect responsible for that front, for that piece of architecture, right in front of what is essentially a building that was constructed and remained unchanged all these years. So, Ian, I'm glad you pointed that out, because Maria Jose, who I met for the first time in December, she's been the validity of our traditional methods, but by tradition doesn't mean immobility, doesn't mean being opposed to change. And that building exemplifies it. But also, I thought, how could that be? It can hold two contrasting views, tradition and also flexibility. So I'm thinking like an old vine, right? An old vine doesn't resist change. If it did, it would suffer and wilt. The roots of the vine doesn't move, and yet it's flexible to vintage variation, weather patterns. And in some ways, I think that's how Lopez, they're perfectly aware of the rhythm of change, the relationship to it, but that beguiling mixture of tradition and flexibility and nonconformism, as she has said, enables them to face the future and continue to be relevant even now, 150 years later.
And with that, we look at this cellar room, and you may notice something about it. There's some philosophical ideas that Lopez has about their facility, about their location being part of the wine's journey, and the balance of nature, and how the microorganisms that they have in the building protect and enhance the end product wine. This is not just for display here. This is a actual working wine cellar, and Lopez on occasion will release even old bottles from the cellar. But when you look at it too, just to state the obvious, we're tasting a 2011. This is an 11-year-old wine that they consider their Reserva, when Reserva is required to be 2 years, right? 2 years in wood, or
yeah, 2 years, yeah. And then additional 10.
Yeah, and the Grand
5 years total in release after bottling, after the vintage. Yeah, so 3 more years after that.
So, and we just tasted a 2015, which is La Rioja Alta's Reserva, and a great one. But this house has a different pace, and their current vintage, and believe me, if they wanted to sell 15s, they could. But they want to sell the wines when they're right, when they're built with a certain cadence and rhythm and philosophy. And the 11 is out now. The Grand Reserva, which we are very fortunate to have 6 bottles of, is in the 2001 vintage. And I'm one of the few places around that even have any.
Good for you, man. That's a hard one to come by. Absolutely.
We're very thankful. You and Hiram set us up and take good care of us. So thank you and your team. But there's a great amount of love for the Tardonia wine. This is a single vineyard. And I think we're looking at that vineyard now.
Yes, we are. And it's a rarity. It's important to know that Viña Tondonia is about 100 hectares. And they're in the process of reforestation and regeneration around the property. They've had this. They've had this property now for well over about 100 years. And the Tondonia comes from the name like tondon, like a rounded shape, or like a shell-shaped depression on the right bank of the Rio Ebro, which is where a very typical very traditional spot for that. The soil is mainly alluvial clay, and I think the key thing to unlock the greatness of Tempranillo is limestone, high proportion of limestone. The average vines are approximately 45, 50 years old. They practice traditional organic farming. Organic, of course, for them has been essentially unchanged, right, all this time. So this is the site that creates that that exhibits the great terroir in the glass. I was there in December, and I'll tell you, it's the wind screams through. It's really almost cold, and some years it's actually snowed during the winter. And so this place is, a beautiful location that they're also rejuvenating, restoring a lot of the forest and a lot of the biodiversity that's key to, I think, the entire totality of the resilience of the place.
And you might look at this, and some wineries have little corners that, oh, that's our old winemaking facility, or this is our old, kind of a museum of the past. No, this is a working wine room that was the original winery, and it's still in use. And there are these large, old, upright barrique that this is part of their process. And by the way, they don't buy necessarily, I'm sure they buy barrels every once in a while, but their philosophy is to repair.
Right.
So they have these coopers there that I wish I had a picture to show. These guys working on barrels. They literally take the leaking staves out of old barrels and replace them and rebuild the barrel. And it's just part of what makes Tardonia, or Lopez, I should say.
Yeah, it makes Lopez Heredia fantastic. And I'm glad you mentioned that practice, of fixing what you own versus buying brand new is so uncommon these days that it feels novel again. The way that organic viticulture is basically old school viticulture before synthetic inputs arose from the world wars, right? From the sciences of the world wars. And their packaging is also, they even had that way back. They had some older 1910s, 1920s that had embossing from another winery. So they used to have this glass bottle return and reuse. Now we're having these sustainable companies solving that last mile of return and reuse schemes. Mexico did it with Coca-Cola in the 60s. Lopez Heredia did it with their wines, over 100 years ago. It's pretty fascinating stuff.
One thing we learned as we were looking at this slideshow, these concrete pillars, if you will, underneath these large tanks, they served another purpose, because back in the old days, and you mentioned snow, you're talking November, December, the grapes fermentation is trying to take place, and they'll actually warm the cellar by putting embers underneath the tanks and warming the cellar so the fermentation can continue.
Right. I should back up and clear up the fact that it's not common for it to snow these days anymore. That was something that had happened only a handful of times. But the fact is that in the wintertime, this is, on the border of continental and maritime influence that's being blocked by the mountains. Yes, there is the key, I think, to unlocking just in general Rioja and the greatness of Tempranillo is that the wide diurnal shift between day and night, and of course the soil having a high proportion of limestone that teases out this finely tuned balance between acid, alcohol, and fruit. And right in the middle of right around Ajaro is really where that takes hold, unlike any other place on Earth.
Here, also kind of a blended approach with 75% Tempranillo, 15 Garnacha,
right,
10 Graciano and Masuelo. We do have a particular spelling on Grenache that we're going to look into a little bit, but I think it's just one of those anomalies that has been forwarded through time, and they keep it that way, but we don't quite know.
It should traditionally be Garnacha with the A at the end, but Yeah, so I mean that's not as important right now as getting into under the skin of the wine. So this is 75% Tempranillo, 15% Garnacha, and then a blend of Graciano and Mazuelo. Mazuelo, of course, some people would know that in France as Carignan, and Garnacha, of course, Grenache in the French tradition, but here the name is Garnacha, and this spends about 6 years in barrels. So this Reserva is aged longer than most Gran Reservas in barrel, with an additional lengthy time in bottle before release. So yes, this is now 12 years being released now to 2011. And I do think trying to channel Maria Jose, of course, she couldn't be here with us today as an importer. I know that I'm a inferior ambassador. Nevertheless, I want to channel something that she said, which is wines should talk by themselves. And she talks about how her father was a vine tender or winemaker, not a winemaker, and that each wine is a reflection of a portion of the land that was bought, whether it was Viña Bosconia or Dondonia. And so the wines respond to the history of Rioja. So I think that meeting this for the first time, if you've not had this before, it's really you got to take a moment to let the layered history, tradition, and timelessness of this wine wash over you and enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I'm doing right now. I'm not really talking so much about it, just enjoying it.
And you know what, I think this wine really is like the quintessential American oak storyteller too, as you can smell that little extra hint of what's the herb I'm thinking of? Dill, right? A little dill.
Yeah. Yeah.
What else you smelling in that glass there, Martin?
Oftentimes people think of American oak as a little bit more of chocolate or mocha. There's some hints of vanilla. Dill comes to mind often. So it's a different expression than French French barrels, French oak, which tends to have more of savory, spicy note. And these are gross generalizations, of course. I think that the beautiful thing to know is that Tempranillo milled incredibly well with American oak. And I know that you're going to cover this or you have or will cover this in the other portions of the seminar, but it's really fun to get into the history of how how the French played a role in developing, or rather being a model for development, the barriques, and then of course how the American oak came to be, and how the economic necessity of the fact that the Spaniards the Rioja producers they couldn't sell their wine quickly enough, so it became a practice they were forced to store their wines in a way that was going to keep and allow the wine to age. So they were not trying to tease out greatness. They were in the beginning, right? It was more of how can we maintain the drinkability of our wines when we are making stuff in the 1880s and 90s. So I know you'll cover that a little bit more, but it's fascinating to see that link, because the family, as a fourth generation, Maria Jose and Mercedes, her sister, they talk about this through the lens, through the filter of that time of being a historian by virtue of their custodial relationship with the land, with the brand, with the terroir, and then of course with the tradition of this of winemaking from Rioja as one of the oldest family-owned producers in Rioja. So when she tells that story, you can just imagine.
Mm.
You can almost picture her grandfather trying to figure things out. In the beginning, he was making bulk wine to sell, right? There was and the property and everything there was a pioneering aspect, but they were not really sure of what they were doing. They didn't keep, I don't think there's many bottles that are, if you ask Maria Jose, she would say, I don't really know a lot of the stuff that happened the first 20 years from 1877 onward, because they weren't building greatness. They were a small business that was for the love of wine, of French wines, that came out of this is the tradition. This is what we want to do. It wasn't aristocratic. It was nowadays we think of winemaking as this grand and noble tradition. And at the time, it was a bit more quaint. It was farming, and oh, that's nice, pat on the back. You're making wine for a living. That's great. Good for you. And maybe you make some money, maybe you don't. Maybe you sell the business off. Maybe you consolidate over time, or maybe the small growers turn into a co-op because they're trying to survive. And that's why this is so rare, is that a single site, single family has not been sold, has not exchanged hands. At one point, they were at risk of going out of business in the early 90s because their style had fallen out of fashion, out of favor. They are considered essentially what they were natural winemakers before that term took hold, obviously a lot later than that. And so you can say they're one of the OGs in that movement. Unfined, unfiltered malolactic happens when it does, and upwards of into July. Oftentimes they turn on the AC by opening up the doors and letting the air come in and out. So it's a fascinating journey into both time and place, unlike any other.
Martin, do you know, where does the metal stocking type of protection on the outside of the bottle come from? What was that about? Do you know?
I recall, and I should have asked her answer, but I recall just from studies that it comes out of, thanks for reminding me, by the way, to refill my glass.
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm empty. And now that I get to show it on screen, I'm like, I'll just pour myself some more. It's only 1:30. It's okay. So, there's two schools. One of them is, of course, again, protection against counterfeiting. That's one short story. The way, and rather tampering with the bottle, whether it's this is happening more, or if it's a bygone era, but the integrity of both what's inside and then also what's outside. It doesn't cling next to other bottles of glass. So that's from what I've heard, and I could very much be corrected. I'm always learning. Those are the two main reasons, is to have that the one bottle next to the other not breaking in transport, and then of course securing the integrity of what came to the consumer at the time.
Well, it's great to be able to taste this with you. And are there any final notes of what you're smelling or tasting in that glass?
Oh my gosh. Well, I think that the fascinating thing about Lopez de Heredia, and in particular Viña Tondoña, is the ability for this to retain freshness, vitality, vibrance, youthfulness on the nose. Bright red cherry, of course, the layered seduction of well-heeled oak, these baking spices, a little bit of herbs. I sometimes, occasionally, I think of mocha, and sort of that vanilla bean spice, and that, along with the development of tertiary aromas and flavors of time, but that it's coalescing around a vehicle of flavor and aroma that's complete. It's seamless, youth and maturity at the same time, interwoven like this beautiful tapestry, textural and aromatic of greatness. That's what comes to mind when I smell it, when I taste Heredia, and in particular Tondoña.
Awesome. Well, we'll taste now with Dane and get everybody's feedback. We thank you for your time, sir.
Thank you, Ian.
Have a good day.
Enjoy,
We'll talk to you soon.
Bye-bye.